If you know me at all, then you know that I am not a sports person. I was not blessed with the hand-eye coordination required to play them or the attention span to watch them. I blame the Tennessee Titans for this apathy towards sports. For a brief time in elementary school, I was one of their biggest fans. I had the tiny jersey, I knew all the players, and even had been to a couple of games. But then came their devastating loss at the Super Bowl when they missed a game-winning touchdown by literal centimeters. My tiny sports fan heart was broken, and I decided that I did not have the fortitude to be emotionally invested in any team ever again. However, over the last few weeks, I have cried more over sports videos than probably ever before in my life. It started with the NBA Finals when the New York Knicks were on a hot streak. My social media feeds were suddenly flooded with video after video of Knicks fans celebrating outside the stadium, neighbors crowding into the streets to watch the games on tiny screens projected onto the sides of bodega buildings, a group of Catholic priests and nuns walking the streets around the arena and praying. As I read the comments below the videos, I realized I wasn't the only non-New Yorker suddenly cheering for the Knicks to win. It seemed like half the country was rooting for them. After the Knicks won, my feeds were once again flooded with a different set of sports-related videos, this time of the World Cup, which apparently we are hosting. These videos depicted fans from around the world coming together in some beautiful ways. A town in Kansas adopting the Algerian team and learning all the chants, wearing the jerseys, and playing Algerian music in their restaurants. Mexican and South Korean fans enthusiastically partying together in Mexico City before and after the matches. Boston basically turning into Scotland, and social media rallying around a German fan earnestly sharing his road trip around the US as he discovers gems like Waffle House and Buc-ee's. Every time I see a video from either of these sports events, I start crying happy tears. And it's not because I'm suddenly in it for the love of the game. I get so emotional because in a time when hate and division seem to be the dominant narratives, seeing people from different cultures, backgrounds, and neighborhoods coming together and sharing themselves with each other is so beautiful and powerful. I keep thinking, this is how it should be. Why can't it be like this always? These moments have given me a glimpse of God's dream for the world, and I long for more of it. Today, we're continuing our summer series on the Beatitudes. The Beatitudes kick off the most famous sermon in Scripture and probably history, the Sermon on the Mount. Beatitude comes from the Latin word for blessing, so the Beatitudes are, you guessed it, blessings. I find it interesting that of all the ways that Jesus could have started his sermon, he chooses to start with a series of blessings, not commands, not indictments, not even a good old friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. The Gospel of Matthew says that Jesus sees the crowd of people, sits down at the top of the mountain, opens his mouth and declares, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." I don't know exactly why Jesus began his sermon with blessings, but it certainly got people's attention, and for good reason. The blessings Jesus proclaimed set the theological mood and framework for the rest of his teachings. He starts by subverting their expectations about who is considered blessed and what it means to be blessed. He continues to turn what they think they know about God and the life of faith on its head for the rest of the sermon. Last week, we explored that first beatitude in depth, so I recommend listening to it on our website if you haven't already. This week, we're subverting expectations by not going in order in our study of the Beatitudes. This week, we're skipping down to the fourth beatitude, which reads, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Have you ever been really, really hungry or thirsty for a very specific food or drink? Like maybe it's been a long day, a stressful one, and all you want is a big, juicy cheeseburger. Or maybe you've been out in the heat, working in the yard or laying out by the pool, and nothing sounds better than an ice-cold glass of water. You're so focused on your hunger or thirst for that very specific thing, and you know that until you get it, you won't truly be satisfied. That's the kind of hunger and thirst that Jesus is talking about here. It's a visceral, full-body experience that can only be relieved or satisfied by one thing. In this case, that thing is righteousness. It's pretty odd for Jesus to talk about hungering and thirsting for righteousness. As far as I know, you can't eat righteousness. You can't go down to the service station and grab an ice-cold can of righteousness from the cooler. Righteousness isn't something you can hold in your hands. So why does Jesus think people are hungry and thirsty for righteousness? Let's start by defining what righteousness is. Righteousness is one of those churchy words that you read a lot in the Bible or sing in hymns and praise songs, but if someone asked you to define or explain it, you'd probably struggle to put it into words. When we hear the word righteousness, we most often associate it with being a morally upstanding person, or a good Christian, or maybe even being in the right with God on our side. In Judaism, and remember, Jesus was a Jew, righteousness is not just an abstract moral concept that applies to an individual. To be righteous is to do what is just and right in our relationships with all of humanity, nature, and God. Righteousness is about actively participating in the work that God is doing in the world, particularly when it comes to making God's kingdom a reality here on earth. The Greek word translated righteousness in this beatitude can also correctly be translated as justice. For Jews and for Jesus, justice and righteousness are deeply entwined. You cannot be righteous if you are not actively participating in the work of repair and restoration, in the work of justice. Of course, to do the work of repair and restoration, you have to acknowledge that something is broken in the first place. When we start thinking about all the things that are broken or not as they should be in the world, we understand why Jesus talks about a hunger and thirst for righteousness. I think maybe Jesus blesses those who hunger and thirst for righteousness because he doesn't want us to just intellectualize what he's saying. He wants us to really feel it in a way we can't ignore. He wants to affirm those people who see the brokenness and injustice in the world and experience a deep physical longing for things to change, a longing that will only be satisfied by all the wrong things being made right. You probably already know what it's like to hunger and thirst for righteousness. There's no shortage of injustices in the world around us. In the last year alone, multiple wars began. Immigrant families were harassed or ripped apart regardless of immigration status. Thousands and thousands of people temporarily lost their SNAP benefits and access to food. Several states all but outlawed the right of transgender people to simply exist. Mass shootings terrorized schools. Extreme political and religious rhetoric is pushing us away from each other. And healthcare continues to be less and less accessible for the majority of us. Things are not as they should be. I don't have to tell you that for you to know it's true. The crowds listening to Jesus preaching that day also didn't need Jesus to list all the ways things were broken. They were very aware. Many of them were poor and outcast from society for various reasons. They were living under the violence and oppression of the Roman Empire. They were hungry and thirsty for change. That's how they found themselves following around an itinerant preacher who made big, bold claims about who God is and what God's dream for the world looked like. Instead of blaming them for their situation or telling them to sit down and shut up, Jesus affirmed and blessed them. Jesus saw them and let them know that God saw them too. Not only did Jesus affirm them, he took things a step further and told them that they would not hunger and thirst forever. They would be filled. They would be satisfied in their work for justice and repair. Following Jesus is an invitation to satisfy that hunger and thirst for righteousness by taking up a new way of living in the world. What follows in the Sermon on the Mount and in all of Jesus' teachings is an invitation to reconsider how things have always been done. Jesus shares God's dream for the world, which is not defined by following strict religious purity laws or making rules about who's in and who's out. God's dream for the world is wholeness and flourishing for all people, no exceptions. God's dream for the world is not about seeking revenge when you've been wronged, but restoration and reconciliation. It's about loving the people who are difficult to love, about choosing the good of your neighbor, your community, instead of power and wealth and a false sense of security. It's about making sure that everyone has enough food to eat and a place to lay their heads at night. God's dream for the world is that we would truly see each other as God sees us and live differently because of it. This all sounds wonderful, right? And it truly is. How incredible would life be if this is what the world looked like? We have to remember, though, that making God's dream a reality isn't easy and doesn't happen overnight, and maybe not even in our lifetimes. Author Misha Boyett writes that to hunger and thirst for a world where every human is treated with equity is to live in a constant push and pull of desire and struggle. It's uncomfortable to long for change in a world that moves towards transformation generation by generation, bits at a time. To embrace the kind of longing that calls for the world to change is to live with hope. Injustice never sleeps, and neither can our belief that the work of God is always a slow unfolding of goodness in the world. Jesus blesses those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, telling them that they will be filled. He doesn't, however, say that they will be filled because everything they hope for will become a reality in their lifetimes. Instead, I think he probably means that by doing what they are able to create a more just and equitable community and world, they will find fulfillment. Father Greg Boyle, a Jesuit priest best known for his work with gang members in Los Angeles, has an interesting interpretation of the Beatitudes. He says the strategy of Jesus is not centered in taking the right stand on issues, but rather standing in the right place with the outcast and those relegated to the margins. Greater precision in translation of the Beatitudes would say, you're in the right place if. The Beatitudes is not a spirituality, after all, it's a geography. It tells us where to stand. I don't know how that interpretation would stand up under academic scrutiny, but I love the framing Boyle uses, especially as it relates to today's Beatitude. You're in the right place if you hunger and thirst for righteousness, because you will be filled. You're in the right place if you are able to see that things are not as they should be and long for them to be different. You're in the right place because you care about the things and people that God cares about. You will be filled because you will experience God in the work of righteousness. You will experience God every time you stand up for the rights and dignity of the marginalized people in this world. You will experience God every time you listen with curiosity to people who believe differently than you, instead of assuming you have all the answers. You will experience God every time you reject the narratives that some people are more worthy of inclusion and respect than others. You will experience God, and you will be filled. This is what it means to hunger and thirst for righteousness and justice. May we all be so blessed.